It's been nearly 3 years since I decided to mod my Switch, and I have done so much with this thing in that time, especially in 2026. So in this video, I'll be giving you all an updated showcase of my modded Switch. I'll be discussing the console itself, repairs I've done, controllers, some homebrew, plugins, and emulation. If you'd like to see some more things that I didn't show in this video, check out my previous modded Switch video on the channel. Also, I'd like to state now that this video is for educational purposes only. I am simply showcasing what I've done with my hardware. Anyways, please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and without further delay, let's get into the showcase. So here's my Switch. It definitely looks much better in my opinion compared to my last showcase. So I bought new Joycons a while back, these being the Nixie Hyperion 2. I got them off AliExpress for about $35 since I did not want to pay full price for them on Nixie's website honestly, and they are really good. These are miles more comfortable than my Joy-Con, and they do have adjustable rumble and motion controls, Hall effect sticks, and turbo. Each controller has a back button to map. Honestly, I haven't used this yet, though by default it was mapped to the joystick click. They also have micro switches for the face buttons and triggers, and they feel really nice, though I have to admit the sound does get a bit annoying sometimes. They also have adjustable RGBs, which is really cool, including the standard RGB flow. But I just keep it on the original red and blue Joy-Con color scheme. I think it looks the best here. They also have removable faceplates. Yeah, besides giving you access to open the controller and remove the screws, this is kind of pointless. But besides that, I really love these controllers for most games. From what I have seen, there still are better options out there. The MobilePad M6 HDs I've heard are some of the best. I also got the carrying case for the Switch meant for these controllers, and it fits pretty great. It is a pretty big case, so I can throw in one of my smaller controllers alongside it, and even a charger or some earbuds. Moving on, I also changed my backplate. In my last video I had a white one, but I switched it to black mainly because I had some issues with the screws on the other one, and I think it looks better with most of my controllers and Joy-Cons. So one really important thing I want to mention here is regarding repairing this thing, because my Switch is still old despite what I've upgraded on the outside. A while back, actually not that long after my previous modded Switch video, my battery started to degrade rapidly, and I knew it was finally time to get a new one. So I bought an iFixit replacement battery, and it's been pretty good ever since. I also just decided to replace the fan as well and apply new thermal paste, and now I can say my Switch almost feels new again. Okay, before I get into the real homebrew stuff, I want to talk about modding the Switch itself and my system. Like I mentioned in my last video, I have a V1 unpatched Switch, which are the only models that can be modded with an RCM jig and without the need of a mod chip. The Switch Lite, OLED, and more recent revisions of the original Switch are patched and require a mod chip. So, taking a look at my home menu, the theme I have here is Fizz Arrow. It looks great and I've been using it for a while now. I also use Sys-Tune to set some custom icons for some of my games here. This is super cool as well. Regarding software, I am still on 19.0.1 firmware with an older version of Atmosphere because I have no reason to update still. Anyhow, let's move on to some homebrew apps and plugins. So regarding some homebrew apps, there isn't much I'll be showing here that I didn't already show in my previous video, but there are some plugins I do really want to highlight here. So going into the Tesla menu, the first one I have here is the status monitor. After I replaced my battery, fan, and thermal paste, I've actually been using this a lot, and I'll be showing it more in a bit. So it has full screen mode, which shows pretty much everything regarding the console's stats like CPU, GPU, and RAM usage, along with temperatures, battery power, and fan speed. I don't really use this mode much. The one I do use frequently is the micro status monitor. This is the most low profile one, and I think is the one that's most useful to have when actually playing games. Besides that, we also have the battery and charger stats of course. I showed this before as well. I do sort of ignore the battery health percentage now since despite having a few full charge cycles with my new battery, the percentage does fluctuate quite a bit. I've had more than a few instances with the battery staying at 1% for over an hour. I'm not sure if the fuel gauge IC is the issue, but I am using the Homebrew app Battery Desync Fix NX to see if it'll fix the issue. So far this is the progress. After a few charge cycles, I ended up at around 4,730 mAh, which of course should correct further and go down to a more realistic range over the coming charge cycles. But I am satisfied with the progress since I had capacity reportings of up to 7,300 mAh when I attempted this the first time. Moving on, we have ReverseNX-RT. I'll talk about this in a bit and I have really neat gameplay results to show regarding this plugin. Of course, one of the most important modules here is Sys-Clk. I almost always keep this on now. I don't have profiles set for everything, especially in handheld mode, so this doesn't really do anything unless I set the profiles, but this is another one that will be really important, especially when we get to emulation. And one final plugin I want to mention is Sys-tune. I showed this last time as well, but this is one of my favorites. I love having music on in the background while in the home menu especially, combined with the custom theme. It just gives it a bit more personality, similar to the 3DS and Wii U era. So, circling back to ReverseNX, there's two games I want to show this working with. First is Resident Evil 5. This game normally targets 30 FPS in docked mode, which feels so choppy in my opinion. This game is more demanding with how much goes on in certain areas, but I did want to see how far I can push it. To fix this and get the game to hit a target of 60 FPS, I go to the Tesla menu, then go to FPSLocker, and set the FPS target to 60. Then I went to ReverseNX-RT to change mode to fake handheld, which lowers the resolution. And finally, Sys-Clk to set the overclock to the max for this game in particular. So here's some Mercenaries United, and the game here is running a lot better, hitting that 60 FPS target pretty consistently, and I think it looks just fine at the handheld resolution. Here I have some side-by-side footage for this particular map in the mode. Now, going to the status monitor to check the temperatures, the system is getting noticeably hotter since it is running at the max overclock and double the frame rate. This is more on the experimental side and I don't really recommend it for this game. But here's some more side-by-side footage, this time in the story mode. In this section, the game barely hits that 60 FPS target since there's just so much happening on screen, so it may be better to just set the FPS cap back to 30, lower the overclock and keep it at the handheld resolution to get a more consistent 30 FPS, rather than have it struggle to hit 60. The next game I want to show here is one that gave me much better results with no overclock, and that is Sonic Generations. So this game normally runs at 30 FPS docked as well, and it feels pretty choppy. So I set the mode to fake handheld in ReverseNX and the FPS cap to 60, and these are the results.
Hold down the boost button for a boost of speed. Once the boost gauge on the lower left is empty, you can no longer use boost. Defeat enemies or collect rings to refill the boost gauge.
Also, here's a side-by-side between stock performance and adjusted performance. Yeah, this game runs so much smoother and is much better to play this way in my opinion, and it looks just fine at the lower resolution too since this is an older game. There are frame dips of course, so turning on a slight overclock may help it to get a locked 60 FPS, but personally, I'm fine with this how it is. Also yes, this does work with Shadow Generations too, but the game doesn't look great on here as it is, so I'm not sure if it's worth lowering the resolution even more to get a higher frame rate. However, from my testing it was pretty smooth. Overall, this is a really neat plugin setup, and it may be useful for some games stuck at 30 FPS, or to help get a more consistent frame rate. Moving on, I really want to highlight some controllers, and I'll be discussing some that work in the stock system and with MissionControl. Before I get into that, I do want to mention this. This is the Retro Flag wired controller and Joycon replacement. The controller is GameCube themed and overall is pretty comfortable, with Hall effect joysticks, a decent D-pad, rumble, and pretty mediocre motion controls. But this was about $40 when I picked it up in February. The footage here is pretty old now, but at the time of me getting this controller, I made a custom theme to go with it. I used the vertical lava lamp theme layout from Gamesir and made images based on the GameCube of course to fit with this controller and the theme's layout. I also used Sys-Tune to set vertical icons for all of my games. I don't use this theme anymore, but this was a pretty fun little project, and I think it looks great with this controller in particular. Anyway, the first controller I want to test with MissionControl, which is a plugin that lets you use tons of controllers through Bluetooth, is the Wii Classic Controller Pro. When I tested the original Classic controller, it had issues with the dead zones and rotations of the joysticks, so I was really happy to see that the Pro didn't have this issue and works just fine. To pair it, just holding the sync button on the Wii remote for a few seconds works. I tested it with some Street Fighter 2 Turbo on MGBA and it feels nice to use. I'm really happy to have this as an option. Next I have the Gamesir Sys-Clk 2. This controller works natively on Switch without any homebrew tools and is one of my favorite Pro controllers to use next to the original. This one has TMR joysticks, micro switches for the buttons, D-pad and triggers, plus some RGB that you can set to the Switch color scheme, along with pretty good rumble and great motion controls. Next I have another Gamesir controller here, the G7 Pro. Believe it or not, I actually won this controller from a TikTok activity, the whole pick 3 products for free. Yeah, somehow I managed to win it, and this controller was one of the items I picked. Anyway, this one has a toggle between 2.4 GHz and Bluetooth, and holding the power button for a few seconds lets it connect. I did have to remap it a bit to fit the layout of the controller, so I switched the ABXY buttons around and it mostly works. Here's some Sonic Mania to test, and overall this could be a decent option if you have a modded Switch. However, one big issue I found was that the home button or capture button isn't mapped on this controller. Pressing the X button doesn't do anything while in the game, so I can't go back to the home menu. Holding the X button does power off the controller though, but it does this normally already. I'm not sure if there's a way to fix this or if this is just a quirk with this controller, especially since this isn't meant to be used with the Switch normally. Another neat option to use with MissionControl is the Dualshock 4. I previously showed the DualSense and that worked great, and the DS4 works just as well, and both the rumble and motion controls work too. I don't really have a game that I can show with this working, but I played some Mega Man X4 and it felt great to use. Moving back to another native Switch controller, here's the 8BitDo SN30 Pro. I've been meaning to pick one of these up for a long time and I'm really glad to have it. It's by far my favorite controller for 2D platformers and fighting games, and I just love the Super Nintendo layout and feel of this thing. This one pairs no problem since it does support the Switch normally, and here's some Metroid Desolation to test. If you'd like to learn more about this game, check out my GBA ROM hacks video. But yeah, there isn't much to say, this is a great option too. The 8BitDo Pro 2 or Pro 3 are probably better, but I do prefer the more compact design of this one. The final controller I have here is my GameCube controller. You might be wondering where the cord is. That's because I got the 8BitDo wireless mod kit to convert this into a Bluetooth controller, and I love it so far. I'll talk about this more in a separate GameCube modding video, but for now I'll be using it on the Switch. It also supports it natively acting as a Pro controller, which does disable the analog triggers, but besides that, it works great. I remapped the shoulder buttons to work properly with what I'll be testing here, which is a GameCube game. I'll dive into this more later in the video, but here's some Melee Akanea to test, and for the most part, it works really well. Anyway, I think I talked a bit too much about controllers here, so it's finally time to move on to some Linux and emulation. So Linux on the Switch is definitely a neat thing to have, and setting it up did take me quite a bit of time, but I think it's pretty cool to experiment with. So I got a different micro SD card to set this up with since I had so much stuff on my SD card I actually use with my Switch, and I did not want to mess with it in the slightest. My standard micro SD card is a 512GB Amazon card. I've had it for 2 years now and it's been super reliable with no issues. The one I'll be using for Linux here is 128GB, which was more than enough for what I wanted to do with it. I did a clean Hikate setup and only put L4T Ubuntu Noble on it. So booting it up here takes us straight to the desktop, and the Joy-Cons of course act as your mouse. This is what the control mapping looks like. Definitely not super comfortable, but it does the job while in handheld mode. You can also adjust the power mode profiles here, which is really important for emulation performance. You can also check the console stats and battery usage as well, similar to Horizon OS. So the emulators I have installed here are Dolphin of course, Azahar, MelonDS, and PPSSPP. I got all of these from the L4T Megascript. I won't be showing DS or PSP emulation here since I'm more than satisfied with how they run in HOS. Of course we have Chrome set up here too, and you can browse the web and go on YouTube. It works decently well. Moving on, before I get into some emulation, I do want to quickly talk about the overclock profiles. So on the SwitchRoot website, it shows the clock speeds on the Switch models. So for the V1, there's 7 profiles to choose from. The profile I used in dock mode is Perf OC All, which I would only try here since trying it in handheld crashed the system for me, and I do not think it's safe to use in actual extended use. I'm not the biggest fan of the fact that we need to do some heavy overclocking here. In handheld mode, I'll be going with perf all, with the fan mode set to cool. I'm not super experienced or knowledgeable on all the best settings, but this is just what I used. Also, I was able to connect my hard drive to transfer my games pretty easily, and I just think this looks so weird having a hard drive connected to the Switch of all things. But to my surprise, transfer speeds were actually pretty good. So first I'll be testing Dolphin. Here's Sonic Heroes running in handheld mode. Performance here is not too bad, usually in the range of 45 to 60 FPS, so I would consider it somewhat playable. So moving over to docked mode, performance is a bit more consistent. I set the CPU clock speed to 80%, with VSync turned on to prevent screen tearing, and performance is pretty similar. Now I'm sure there are some settings I could have adjusted to get slightly better performance, but I chose not to here. This isn't really meant to be a formal benchmark, mainly just my testing of these emulators. Moving on to some 2-disc games, first is Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes in handheld mode. Similar to Sonic Heroes, we're in that 45 to 60 FPS range, but I would say this is a bit more playable. Now in docked mode, again performance is better here, but we're not quite hitting that 60 FPS target frequently enough. But I'd say this is still pretty good. Next up is Resident Evil Code Veronica. I'll just go straight to docked mode here since the footage I captured in handheld mode is very hard to see, but since this game is capped at 30 FPS, it runs very well, hitting that target. I don't have many issues here so far. The final game I tested here was LEGO Star Wars 2. This game ran very well too, pretty much staying at a locked 60 FPS throughout gameplay, and I'd say it was a pretty good experience. Now, I did want to show at least one Wii game working here, so here's Tatsunoko vs Capcom, and this game ran okay. The first match I played here had some pretty major stuttering when doing special moves, but it was somewhat playable, so I switched to hybrid Uber shaders and played another match. This time I had minimal stuttering, but the frame rate was in a similar range as before at around 45 to 50 FPS. Still a somewhat decent experience. Now, moving on to 3DS emulation with Azahar, I'll be playing all of these games at native resolution. So, the main game I tested was Super Street Fighter 4, and it ran pretty well. I did see some pretty noticeable screen shaking with this game in particular, which was a bit distracting, but the game was playable otherwise, pretty much staying at a locked 30 FPS.
Don't underestimate me.
I also tested Dragon Ball Z Extreme Butoden. This game ran great playing at 60 FPS. I figure it's largely due to the game's very simple art style and sprites, making it less demanding compared to a game like Street Fighter 4. And the final game I tested was LEGO Harry Potter Years 5 through 7, and this game ran really well. This one is capped at 30 FPS and hits it consistently. I did, however, notice some audio bugs in the cutscenes. So to conclude, Linux is super neat and awesome to have on Switch, but I honestly wouldn't really call this a convenient and great way to emulate on here. I just don't think this is super practical for a few reasons. 1. The Switch's hardware is over a decade old at this point. It's showing its age regardless of its decent performance here. 2. There are much better options for emulating these consoles, and Linux is not the easiest to set up. Although Ubuntu wasn't hard per se, I think the long downloads and wait times just to experiment with 3DS, Wii, and GameCube emulation is not really worth it for me when I already have a PC and Android device that can play these so much better. With that said, I have enjoyed tinkering and testing some of these emulators on Linux, and while I can't show much footage here, I of course had to try some GameCube and Wii ROM hacks like Mario Kart Double Dash Plus, Luigi's Mansion Premium Deluxe, and Neo Mario Galaxy, and they ran okay. However, one big console I did not test was PS2. I'm not too sure about performance on Android since I didn't opt to install it, but if you haven't tried out some games, feel free to leave a comment. I'd love to discuss. Also, just having the ability to turn this thing into a full-blown PC paired with a keyboard and mouse is just awesome regardless. Here I have my wireless keyboard and mouse set up with the USB dongle, and it works flawlessly. So back to Horizon OS and emulation here. I first want to start with MelonDS. For this one I'll be using the FlipGrip. I got this for about $3 off AliExpress, and essentially you slide your Switch into it, and it gives the console a vertical orientation. Then on each side you can just slide your Joy-Cons in, and since the screen isn't going to rotate on its own, we do have to go to the MelonDS settings, and I'll be setting the rotation to 270 degrees, along with the screen layout to vertical. So the first game I'll be testing is Castlevania Rondo of Ruin, which is a ROM hack of Portrait of Ruin, and I'll be playing on the stock clocks for all the games I'll be showing here. I don't have any upscaling set here either. So this game runs pretty much flawlessly, practically no frame dips or stuttering, which I mean is sort of expected since this is a DS game. Moving on to some Dragon Ball Z Supersonic Warriors 2, I've really been enjoying this game, especially with the way the camera moves as you fight. And of course, this game runs flawlessly as well. Next up I have Sonic Rush here, and I sort of prefer playing the game on here instead of a DS or 3DS since there's no gap between the screens, and I think it makes the transitions look more flawless. I also tried some Need for Speed Nitro. This game runs really well too, but I did notice a few frame drops. It could probably be fixed with some slight overclocking, but honestly it plays just fine for the most part. And finally, here's some Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. This game feels so smooth running at 60 FPS, and I didn't notice any frame dips or issues with performance, and this felt really good to play. Honestly, this looks pretty cool, and with the custom D-pad Joy-Con I use combined with grips, it feels pretty comfortable. I've essentially transformed my Switch into a DS here, and since it has that touchscreen, this can be a great option with touchscreen games. Also, the FlipGrip may be a good option for some older vertical arcade games. I had to try my stylus with PictoChat too, and it works great. So overall, DS emulation on Switch is excellent. I've been using MelonDS on here for a few years now, and I've only had a few minor hiccups and glitches with some games. And of course, certain games may require some overclocking, but other than that, this has been an excellent way for me to play my DS library. So before we move on to the next system, I quickly want to show Sonic Adventure 2 running through Retroarch. I previously showed it running through Flycast, but if you use Retroarch and an NSP forwarder generator, you can create a forwarder for some games on the home screen, and this is what I have for Sonic Adventure 2. Honestly, I do very much prefer Flycast standalone as I have had issues with the game on Retroarch saving progress, but performance here is still great. I do have the CPU overclock set to 1.2 GHz here because I was having some stuttering in the stock clock speeds, and this did help. I also have the widescreen hack enabled too. I do recall the game running very well with these settings in the Flycast standalone emulator as well. So next up is PSP emulation with PPSSPP standalone. I previously only showed 2 games, but this time I have quite a few more to show, starting with Mega Man Maverick Hunter X. For the games I'll be showing here, I'll be using an overclock of 1.4 GHz or 1.5 GHz on the CPU, 460 MHz on the GPU, and 1.6 GHz on the memory. I'll also be using the 2x resolution upscale. Anyway, this game runs pretty much flawlessly. I've really been meaning to play this version of Mega Man X more, and I might just get back into it after playing it again on Switch. Up next is LEGO Batman. This game runs really well, and although the textures don't look great, I really enjoyed coming back to this game here. It is by far my favorite LEGO game. I did notice what looks like internal frame drops while playing, but the FPS counter would always be at around 60 FPS, which was a bit odd. I'm not too sure if the game has internal frame drops or the emulator just isn't reporting it properly, but this was the only game I had this issue with. Besides that, it's more than playable. I also tried out Tekken 6, and for this game I increased the CPU clock to 1.5 GHz, and it runs really well. I'll be keeping it at this clock speed for the next few games as well. I did try out Metal Gear Solid portable apps as well, and normally this game is capped at 20 FPS, which I just think is unplayable. So I used the 60 FPS cheat code to unlock the frame rate. This is definitely much better, but it doesn't hit that target much at all, and the game does feel a bit slow still. So I turned on frame skip to cap the FPS at 30, and this is way more playable. Honestly, anything higher than 20 FPS is a win in my opinion. And finally, I tried out some God of War Ghost of Sparta, and from what I have played so far, it runs almost flawlessly at 60 FPS. I'm not too sure how some of these games hold up in terms of late game performance or compatibility issues with some other games I haven't tried yet, but overall, PSP emulation on Switch is really good, at least for the games I plan on playing. I also want to take a moment to talk about Sega Saturn emulation through the Yabasan core and Tico. If you're wondering, Tico is a custom emulation frontend for the Switch that has emulator cores for systems like N64, Sega Saturn, Dreamcast, and what I think is the most important, GameCube and Wii through Dolphin. I'll be showing some GameCube performance near the end of this video. So Sega Saturn does require the BIOS files here. It was an easy setup and I do have a few games I want to test. First is Road Rash. This game ran just fine, I didn't notice any stuttering or frame drops, and I've actually wanted to try this game out for the longest time, so this was a pretty fun experience. Next up is Virtua Fighter Remix. This game ran fine but did feel a bit sluggish. I'm not sure the exact frame rate I got while playing this one since there's no FPS counter, but it still felt very playable here. The last game I tested here was of course Sonic Jam, and for the most part the game plays just fine. Here's some Sonic 3 running on it. I also tried out Sonic World, and this did actually crash the software. I tried it a few times and it crashed every time. I do sort of expect this since this project is still in an early state as of this video, and not every game is fully compatible. I'll get a bit more into that when I get to GameCube emulation. Before I move on though, I did want to try out at least one Nintendo 64 game through Tico and compare it to Retroarch. So here I have Mario Kart 64 amped up, which is one of my favorite N64 ROM hacks, running at a pretty smooth 60 FPS. I did have overclocking turned on, but I was honestly very impressed with the performance here because I didn't really change any settings. I say this because I tried a few times in Retroarch to get this hack up and running smoothly, but it just didn't work, even with the max overclock enabled and the FPS capped at 30. I'm honestly not sure what the issue is. So as a quick comparison, here's a side-by-side of the game running in Tico compared to Retroarch. Yeah, the game runs much better in Tico. I may try out some more N64 games soon, because I really like the performance here so far. So one more homebrew app I do want to highlight quickly again is Moonlight, which lets you stream your PC games and content through your Switch through Sunshine. So I just go straight to Steam in big picture mode and launch some of my games through there. Here's some Metal Gear Solid 5. This game felt decent to play, but I did notice some input lag and even some screen tearing. I also tried out Sonic Project 06. This game ran about the same. It did feel pretty smooth, but the input lag was there along with some choppiness. These next two games felt much better. It may have something to do with the update Moonlight had recently, which was released after I recorded my previous footage, combined with my Wi-Fi connection being slightly better this time. Here I have Resident Evil 2. I do play with mods of course on PC, and honestly the delay was minimal and I was actually able to enjoy playing the game this way. I set the game's resolution down to 720p since I don't have the most powerful PC and I didn't want to push it too hard, but I'd say it looks pretty good here. I got basically no screen tearing or freezing as well. However, I have to say it is quite hard to aim here with these Joycons. So to get a quick visual of the latency here, here's some GTA 4 gameplay. I set the resolution to 720p here as well, and the game is actually staying at 60 FPS. It actually runs quite poorly when I normally play at 1080p, so I might just keep it at this resolution from now on. Anyhow, as you can see here, the delay is actually pretty small. This is some of the best results I've had with Moonlight. The final game I played was Call of Duty Black Ops 2 through Plutonium. I had to add the launcher to Steam so Steam Input would pick up the Joycon as a controller, but besides that, this was actually pretty good on here too. I was on an EU server and surprisingly I played decently. I think the input lag is small enough here to actually play the game properly, and I really enjoyed it. So this is of course quite dependent on your internet speed, but adjusting some more of the settings may help, and the latest update for the app has definitely improved the experience for me to the point where I might start using this more often. I just think it's super cool to have the option to turn the Switch into a streaming device. And last but not least, I'll be testing out GameCube emulation on Horizon OS through Tico's Dolphin core. I did show a bit of this running earlier when I tested my GameCube controller with Melee Akanea on here. So regarding settings, I won't be changing the emulated CPU clock speed for any of the games I test here, and I'll have a decently high overclock for most of the games. But by default, a pretty high overclock is set when you launch a game. I also have the BIOS setup here with my memory card imported from Dolphin on my PC. I'm very glad this works just like the Linux version of Dolphin. The first game I tried was Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2. I first tried with a pretty high GPU overclock in docked mode and the game ran phenomenally, with little frame drops or stuttering. Since it ran so well, I decided to play in handheld and dropped the overclock settings down, and it maintained excellent performance. The only issue I had in both docked and handheld mode was the opening cutscene not running properly. I also had to try Budokai 1 to see if there was a difference in performance, and honestly, there really wasn't. This game ran just as well and felt really good to play. I'm actually glad to have come back to this game since beating the story mode a few years back. Another game I tried was Crazy Taxi. This game ran really well for the most part, I don't have much complaints here. I actually haven't sat down to play an entire session of this game before, despite having had it on my GameCube and Wii for years at this point. So this is definitely one I'll be coming back to again and playing on here. I also had to play a ROM hack too, Here's Some Halloween Haunt, and this ran very well. I played through the entire hack on here and I really enjoyed it. And of course the vanilla game runs very well too. So this is of course not perfect, not every game I've tried runs and not all games run good, but I am very impressed by the performance here so far, and this is a lot more convenient to use when compared to booting into a completely different operating system. However, similar to Linux, I'm not a huge fan of the fact that some games need a high overclock to run properly. But realistically, this isn't a huge deal for me since battery drain and temperatures aren't a big problem for my system anymore. As an example of a game I tried that didn't run well, here's some Soulcalibur 2. And this game ran pretty much in slow motion, I'm guessing around the 30 FPS mark. I did also try some games in ROM hacks like Mario Kart Double Dash Plus, Animal Crossing Deluxe, Wario World, and WarioWare Inc., and they all ran pretty much perfectly besides Double Dash Plus, so I may discuss and show those games running in the future. Okay, there was definitely a lot I talked about in this video, and I hope you all enjoyed it. I absolutely love my Switch, and in the time since I've modded it, I've pretty much turned it into my all-in-one handheld console. Anyway, let me know what you think, and thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you all soon.